Earthquakes have seemingly been on the increase in both regularity and ferocity. The news has been packed with details on the many recent quakes, and some are speculating that they are only going to get worse. There are those that have claimed that this is no natural phenomena and that it could be an attack. Tectonic weapons being used in a global tit-for-tat secret battle. Others say it may well be underground testing of nuclear weapons, and that the recent 6.4 quake in the Mojave Desert was organised to correspond with 4th of July celebrations. This so the celebrations covered up and distracted people from this test. So are there secret programs that are or have developed a weapon which is capable of causing earthquakes anywhere around the globe? Let's take a look. Welcome to IF, videos on conspiracy, ufology and cryptozoology. Hit that subscribe button and ring that bell so you never miss a video again. The recent rash of tectonic activity has been widespread, but a few of the places hit may have been specific targets and thus prove that someone has tectonic weaponry. The big three, Russia, China and the US, are the obvious nations that would most likely be the first to develop this type of strike capability, and there is some history, or maybe propaganda, that shows the Russians were taking part in a program to develop these weapons or a campaign of disinformation during the 1990s, going back to the years 1992 and 1993. There was a widespread suspicion and rumour that the Russian military had used a tectonic weapon against Armenia back in 1988. This story began to be pushed over the radio waves in the summer of 1991. It forced a statement from the Soviets, and an official Russian military spokesman said, "We are being accused of developing a barbaric weapon for use against peaceful inhabitants, thus driving a wedge between the civilian population and the military." This, according to the Russians, was nothing more than propaganda against the nation by those that wanted Armenia to be free of Russian influence. This earthquake weapons disinformation operation continued, and by 2010, RT, Russia Today, the state's national broadcaster, and other mainstream media disinformation outlets and Russian allies struck back with accusations that the USA had developed this weapon and had used them in Haiti. On January 12, 2010, a 7.0 magnitude earthquake ravaged Haiti. An estimated 230,000 people were killed, another 300,000 were injured. More than 600,000 people left Port-au-Prince to stay with families outside the capital. The quake displaced 1.5 million people. Makeshift camps sprung up to shelter them. In total, the quake affected 20% of the nation's 10.4 million population. And these stories keep boiling to the surface, and with the recent 7.1 magnitude earthquake that rattled Southern California on Friday 5th July, and then just one day after, the strongest recorded quake they've had in 20 years, and seismologists warning that more episodes are expected. Rumour has once again begun to spread. Is this a weapon strike? Who was responsible? Were they trying to trigger the big one and set off the San Andreas fault line? Are there any cases of past earthquakes that were successfully predicted and thus could prove that some man-made creation was responsible for a specific quake? One of the most famous seers, a man who it has been claimed predicted the majority of large events that have occurred in modern history, Nostradamus. Many make claim that the famous prophet foretold the tectonic activity that occurred on October 1st in 1987. Once again, in California, Nostradamus used mystical planetary alignments to predict his quake, but as is often the case with his quatrains, a quatrain being a verse with 4 lines or even a full poem containing 4 lines, having an independent and separate theme. Often one line consists of alternating rhymes existing in a variety of forms. We can trace back quatrains in poetic traditions of various ancient civilizations such as China, ancient Rome and ancient Greece. The Nostradamus predictions seem to have been twisted to match an event rather than being an exact method of foretelling the future. Even with this method's inaccuracies, others have used it to make predictions. Cambridge astrophysicist John Gribben and Stephen Plageman predicted a catastrophic earthquake would hit California on March 10, 1982. It didn't. So these mystical predictions offer us no method of prediction and do not rely on technology for that answer. If there is some kind of tectonic weapon, it would have to be technologically based. So are there any stories that we could link back to that angle? Let's go back to the incident which occurred in Armenia on December 7, 1988. A quake measuring between 6 and 7 on the Richter scale hit. It would become known as the Spitak earthquake. Estimates range in the area of between 25,000 to 60,000 deaths. At the time of the disaster, the Soviet press quickly named it a tragedy. They adopted a mournful stance on the disaster, calling it an earthquake of unprecedented strength and an unpredictable catastrophe. Yet more spin was put on these reports when the official Russian news agencies reported a story that came to be called the miracle of Leninakan or Leninakan miracle. The news reported the tale of several men's miraculous survival. Strangely, this story was later claimed to be a fabrication. For some reason, the Russians felt they needed a hoax story. This is strange and raises more questions. Why was this story needed? What were they trying to divert attention from? The Russians were heavily criticized after the disaster. It was said that the relief effort was slow to come and under-equipped for a disaster of that magnitude, and they should have accepted more help from outside countries. Some claimed that the Russians tested a weapon on Armenia, a weapon that would later be used to strike the US. October 1989, California was rocked by a 6.9, 7.0 magnitude earthquake during Game 3 of the World Series. Speculation was rife that this was a Russian attack, even though there was no evidence to support a Soviet attack from a weapon that no one knew existed. The public, stoked by the US propaganda machine, pointed to the timing of the quake and the publicity and the similar scale to that of the Spitak earthquake as proof. The idea of Russian tectonic weapons systems was given a boost when Alexei Vezvolodovich Nikolaev, professor at the Russian Academy of Sciences, approached the topic. Nikolaev claimed that the ground needs to be capable of responding to a trigger in order for the tectonic weapon to work, such as a geological feature like a fault line. In this same discussion, he dismissed out of hand the rumors we still hear today, that Russian military had deployed a tectonic weapon against Armenia. This strike in retribution for the mass protest against Soviet rule which took place through much of that time period. Nowhere in his statements did he deny the existence of these weapons, and at around the same time these statements were made, a Ukrainian journalist reported the existence of a Russian nuclear facility which was disguised as a seismological lab. This laboratory was supposedly involved in the testing of directional underground nuclear explosions. The Ukrainian said he was informed by former Russian personnel that had worked at the lab during the 1980s. So how about the other nations I mentioned? The United States were accused of using tectonic weapons by Hugo Chavez. He told journalists of a report that he had received from Russia's Northern Fleet. The report said that the US Navy had fired an earthquake weapon into Haiti. This because the US wished to destabilize the country. So what about the last major player? China. The Chinese have been involved in a long-running dispute with India over the border, and in 2017 the news agencies of India reported that a weapon was tested in Nagwa area of Sichuan. It said that India should be prepared for earthquakes and or landslides that are being planned as part of a Chinese offensive. The Chinese foreign minister briefed India Press Club, who are in China at China's invitation, that if war was imminent, China would not be afraid to use its weapon. Thankfully, sanity prevailed and both countries stood back from conflict. but we did see one nation threaten another with a weapon that causes quakes. That could be considered proof of tectonic weaponry being used today. In conclusion, regardless of whether tectonic weapons are a real threat or just a scary product of disinformation, there is evidence that the major powers are aware of man-made earthquakes and tectonic weapons systems. Is this awareness down to the fact each knows that the other has this capability, or is it because they fear that another nation has created a technology which they do not have? What do you think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, if you like what I do here on the channel, hit that red button, like and share. You can catch the latest by searching We Are If. Thanks so much for watching. I'll see you next time.